What we're going to be talking about in the next panel is transformation in the Islamic world. And this is a very broad subject. So whilst the panelists are getting mic'd up, I'll tell you what we're going to talk about. We're going to pick three very specific areas in Islam. So it's the role of women is the first topic. Democracy and freedom in the Islamic world. Okay, and thirdly, we're going to look at the state of innovation and entrepreneurism in the Islamic world. So, and by the Islamic world, we're not going to restrict ourselves regionally. We're going to talk right through the Arab Islamic nations, through to Asia. And I want to say, all of us see, the press is, we get bombarded through our Western media on the Islamic world, and you'd have to say 90% of it is negative, right? So it is framing the way we develop our perception of the data into facts, okay? So what we're hoping to do today is put a lens over three key areas and give you new frames of reference for that, okay? We have three great panelists. You'll see their pictures, so I'll do this. So first, Rahilla, who's the author of Arab Woman Rising, based in New York. We have Jonathan Wilson, University of Greenwich. Great guy, played for the English schoolboy rugby team, and he looks like a very devastating runner, so we won't aggravate him on the panel. And Muhammed Mekki from Dubai, who runs an accelerator incubator in the Gulf countries. Okay, when Rob asked me to do this panel, I thought it's a bit of light relief for you. Why would a Jewish Catholic boy from New Zealand want to be facilitating this panel? So I kind of thought about it, but I do have a bit of family history. So many of you probably don't know, my father was actually born in Jerusalem in Palestine in 1920 and spent the first 29 years of his life growing up between Palestine, Syria, and the Lebanon, or the Levant, as the British like to call it. He was fluent in Arabic and Hebrew. And I remember when I was 6 years old, as the panel's sitting down, that he was reading backwards one day. And I said, "Dad, how come you're reading the book backwards?" And he said, "Well, I'm reading Arabic." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, I'm reading the Quran." And I said, "Why are you reading the Quran?" And what, it's the Muslim Bible, Islamic Bible. He said, "Well, I'm trying to figure out religion. So I'm reading the Quran in Arabic, I'm reading the Torah in Hebrew, and I'm reading the Bible in English. I'm reading all three." That was kind of my father. Should have been an academic, I said. And his conclusion was all the religions share so much in common that they're irrelevant. There's only one kind of faith perspective. So, and that made me realize one thing. Rahilla, please. Oh, you're still waiting for your microphone? Oh, okay. No, when you're ready. I don't know why the mic's not ready. So anyway, that made me realize that facts are kind of amorphous. Every person looks at a set of data and shapes through their lens a set of facts, okay? So facts are actually different off the same set of data. And I think this is kind of an underpinning of the panel. And the last fact about my family is my grandfather served as a British officer under King Abdullah in the Arab Legion in Transjordan days. So I have a lot of connections. And I speak no Arabic or Hebrew. Unfortunately, Rahilla's our first speaker, and she's got slides, so she has to be our first speaker. So I'm sorry. So Rahilla, I'll start teeing up your question. Okay, so I think, the role of women in Islam, I think there's a real dichotomy that we see in the Islamic world, and I'm going to ask Rahilla to talk to the subject, that we see the oppression that we read about of women in Saudi Arabia, the almost extremism we see with the terrible kidnapping in Nigeria, and people that hold themselves up as Islamic, people that women shouldn't get an education. And yet we saw the more secular societies where women have a great role in countries like Iran, Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia. So that's a real dichotomy, and I'd certainly would like Rahilla to, so I'm stretching this one out, here she comes, to shed some light on that dichotomy and give us a perspective on the role of women in Islam and particularly within the Arab world. So.
Well, basically, I think in the Muslim world, it's really exciting for women. I think that it is the age of women in the Muslim world. And I think my story happened really, I worked in both Afghanistan and Pakistan. And, I saw a very broad spectrum of things from, women that were part of ministries and had very senior roles to, a growing middle class of women. I was one of the writers for the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Women's Initiative, which, I think you kind of have to look at beyond microfinance, because in countries like Afghanistan, there are a lot of women that have companies from 5 to 10 to 50 employees that have huge potential to scale, but then unfortunately because of the banking system there, they don't have access to funds. So I think that that's something very important to look at. I mean, not just looking at things from, you know, like let's provide Afghan women with microfinance. But one thing about Afghanistan that did bother me is that there's a lot of prostitution, you know, because of an extreme interpretation of Islam, you know, that isn't necessarily the dominant interpretation, but it's one that does exist, and especially in a country where there's been, you know, so much war and things like that. You know, there were women that were illiterate, their husbands were either drug addicted, or they, you know, passed away because of war and things like that. That was the only means of survival, was prostitution. And that viewpoint really, really bothered me, and I was kind of thinking, well, how can you change this? Because, you know, quite frankly, women that, you know, lower income women in countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan are not going to look up to women in the United States. They're going to look up to women in the Arab world. And I was spending a lot of time in the Arab world, and I saw that women were CEOs of companies, they were, you know, in clean tech, they were part of every single sector, and we weren't hearing about this. So I continued to write for the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Women's Initiative, and I got to continue kind of telling these stories, and I ended up being a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, and Wharton Business School ended up funding the book Arab Women Rising.
Mention other business schools. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Which you guys can download for free. And it was 35 women from across the Arab world, from Saudi Arabia to Egypt, you know, that have started businesses. You can download it on Kindle or whatever device that you use. And honestly, it could have been 3,000 women, not 35. There's just a bottomless pit of women doing phenomenal things. And what I think is happening, and I think this is from a corporate standpoint, this is what I think corporations should pay attention to. There are so many well-educated middle-class women that are recognizing problems in their society, such as lack of financial literacy, obesity issues, not understanding environmental issues and wanting to teach their children about it at a young age. You know, it's a very, very tech-savvy society. And I think GE did a wonderful thing. Recently, it was just a couple of weeks ago. A lot of my Saudi female friends are all like, we're part of this GE initiative, we're all coming to New York. They went and they handpicked about a dozen Saudi women role models from all different social classes that were involved in so many different sectors, and they invited them, you know, for training. And on top of that, what they wanted to do, and these women came from all over Saudi Arabia, they were creating a network. So these women can think of an initiative that they want to scale, and they, you know, are doing like they're acquiring lots of follow-up, where these women can support each other in making these things happen that they're working on, and then also provide them with resources that they may have at GE or elsewhere. So I think that if you're a global company and you're not engaging with women in the Arab world, I think you're really missing out. I think unfortunately there's this stereotype, or there's an industry actually of subjugated Muslim women, and you know, yes, there's a pocket of a population, just as there's a pocket of a population in the United States where, you know, there's extremism and things like that, but you can't look at the whole Muslim world that way. And I think that one last comment I would just like to make is with Malala. When she met with Barack Obama, what she said to him was, you know, stop droning Pakistan. And I think this is a great book. It's called Do Muslim Women Need Saving? And I think it really goes through the entire industry of books like Half the Sky that I think are well-intentioned, but just sort of portray the Muslim world and Muslim women as needing to be saved and not really recognizing how there's phenomenal Muslim women within their own countries that are the driving force behind changing their society. And as you can see, just the Arab world, from Morocco to Saudi Arabia to Oman, like none of these countries are the same. You know, you can't stereotype them. They're both so different. How do I go? This is she wrote the foreword to Arab Women Rising, to my book, and she and I are co-writing another book together on women in Saudi Arabia. Her name is Reem Asad. She's a middle-class Saudi woman, and she just got frustrated with having to buy lingerie from a man. So she went to Facebook and she created a national campaign to boycott lingerie stores until they allow women in Saudi Arabia to work in retail. She won. She had thousands of Saudi men and women from all around the world supporting her, and she was one of the women that GE invited. This is Yasmin. Actually, if you go and you visit her in Riyadh at her hospital, it's a completely co-ed environment. She doesn't cover her head. She's one of the leading Saudi scientists, and what she's doing is she's one of the key people that's taking on the religious right, really pushing for years. She's been pushing for Saudi women in Saudi girls in public schools to be able to play sports. And she's using an economic argument, basically saying we have the largest obesity rate among teenage girls in any place else in the world. And we're going to have a huge epidemic of diabetes and health issues, and our hospitals can't fill that. And using an economic argument is something that the religious right, which is weakening, and it's only going to get weaker in Saudi Arabia, can't argue with. This is another woman named Molly, and she's Kuwaiti. She comes from a very wealthy background. She just went to Yemen, and she's devoted her life to doing microfinance and health initiatives in Yemen. And I think she did make some comments about how a lot of Western colleagues that she had were killed because they were accused of being missionaries, and how, you know, she was very sad about that. But at the same time, she sort of pointed out how, as a fellow Arab, like coming in and working in these communities, you know, she was able to kind of have access that and not be under the same type of threat. So I think that she's a fantastic example of, you know, an Arab woman kind of leaving her country and leaving her comfort zone and being part of development. And this is Huda. She's an Omani woman, and she's the highest ranked woman in private equity. She works for a firm that many of you guys have heard of, well, private equity in the Middle East, Abraj. I don't know if that's one of the largest private equity firms in the region. And this is honestly, you know, I lived in Afghanistan for 3 years. I've seen so many girls like this. This is an Afghan girl playing soccer. There's soccer leagues now. There's bicycle leagues. So I mean, having a viewpoint of, you know, my book agent was actually talking to me in New York about how, you know, is it true that if they stand outside with ice cream, like somebody will shoot them? I mean, there's just so many stereotypes. And this is, we're not related. I'd be honored to be related to her, but I'm not. But growing up in my early 20s, when I would be visiting Pakistan, she was one of my role models. She worked with Muhammad Yunus to start one of the best microfinance programs in Pakistan, working with women. Rahilla Zafar, her father was a lawyer. She comes from an upper middle class background, and she studied in the US, and she went back to Pakistan.
Great job. So we're going to switch now to democracy and freedom with Islamic countries, and you know, asking Jonathan to kind of take this one on. Okay. And just to sort of set the stage, I think, you know, as we look at it, you know, we see democracy and freedom playing out in different ways across the Islamic world. You know, whether you see it in Turkey, you know, the Arab Spring, Egypt, and there's even some naysayers that say democracy and freedom and Islam are actually incompatible. So I'd really be interested in you to try and you know, shed some light on this, and also how that translates into economic and free market implications. You know, so how does that all play out in reality? So I'm just being a little bit provocative.
So no pressure then, right?
No pressure, Jonathan. Go on.
So Islamic,
like.
this term Islamic, so many countries, more than Asia.
Yep.
No pressure then. Drinks in about 15 minutes, I believe. No pressure because there have been so many amazing speakers, and no pressure because we all learned how to be creative yesterday, right? Who is Kick-Ass Tobias? You know, I've got to follow all of these things. But within that paradigm, you know, I should thank Rob for getting me to come over here. I should thank Jackie from Indonesia for connecting with Rob. And I think I can see Professor Philip Kotler. I should say thank you very much for sitting there. And this is an amazing, because last time we met was in Jakarta, right? This is truly amazing, because I think in '96 I was doing my MBA, and your book, of course, is the book that I read in marketing. And so to kind of be here is pretty crazy. And I decided at some stage I was going to set about the task of going to crazy places, trying to find crazy things, and to try and make them seem not so crazy and to see if they would become a craze. Now that's quite tough because if you think about what you guys have done, right, got rid of Saddam Hussein, and then you got a president with the middle name Hussein, which is kind of insane. You know, the task is very hard. But along the way, what I decided, and the other disclaimer is, in trying to answer this question, and I won't duck the question, is I'm an academic and I'm a consultant. I'm a marketing academic. Marketing is my bread and butter. I'm not a holy man. I'm not a religious leader. I'm not part of any groups. I'm not a politician. So the focus of me giving you this information or the approach that I'm taking is because I genuinely believe that business and education are the two ways that we're going to solve a lot of these problems. And this Islamic thing is a problem, right? So within that, my approach is looking at cultural phenomena. And if you think, is it about studying Sharia? Yeah, to a certain extent. But also, you know, I bother myself with questions like, why do babies like milk and adults don't? Or, you know, why do some people like bitter food? Why do people get tattoos? You know, watching sport, watching the European Champions League football, listening to music. Why is hip hop a cultural phenomenon? All of these things, you might say, what has that got to do with religion? Because if I was a football fanatic, it's not such a big thing as opposed to a Islamic or religious or Muslim fanatic, right? So I kind of went on this journey. But then several years ago, I was faced with this challenge. I've never wanted to be stereotyped. You know, one of the things as a professional is you don't want to be known as that black guy who's an expert on black things. But then I decided that, well, I thought I would decide to be positively stereotyped. I thought, why not? What's the worst that could happen? The worst thing that could happen is that, you know, people decide that you are someone they should talk to about Islamic stuff or Muslim stuff or halal stuff or Islamic finance stuff. Yeah, it's a fantastic after-dinner conversation, right? Especially if you're a Muslim, which you might think, why would you do this? And, you know, I became a Muslim 14 years ago, before September the 11th. So this is kind of, you know, this is really crazy stuff, right? So why am I still here and why am I thinking about these things? Well, I think one of the things that I'd like to talk about is, and you know, Ambassador Chin mentioned BRIC. About a decade ago, we had this idea of BRIC: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And then about a year or so ago, more acronyms came out, and I wrote an article recently in the Guardian newspaper, and there's this acronym MINT, right? Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. And then we have CIVITs, right? Colombia. Where are my Colombian brothers? Okay, so there you go. This is why they're here, right? Colombia is the next hottest thing. Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey, and South Africa. So I thought to myself, what about the population figures? I went to the Pew Research Forum and looked. What a surprise. This thing called Islam or Muslims, they're getting bigger. They're coming all over the place, right? The countries that have Muslim majorities or high Muslim populations, Indonesia is about 210 million, Turkey's about 75 million, you've got your 50-50 split in Nigeria. This thing is getting bigger, this elephant in the room. And then you've got the UK, people are converting to Islam, 2/3 of which are women. Then I go to Marseille, and 1/3 of the population are Muslim, and they reckon it's going to be the first Muslim majority Western city. These things are kind of crazy. So, to try and answer your question, when I've been thinking about some of these things, essentially, you know, being the academic, you know, I go off into the wilderness, and, you know, today I've come with my A game, right? I picked the tie, the shoes to match the chair. You know, I thought Northwestern University, I've really got out there. I've really tried.
I think your leather's a bit better quality.
Yeah, I just didn't brush my hair. Sorry about that. But the thing that I wanted to pick up on is this idea of words and terms. Islam and democracy. Does that work? Is one a religion? Or even, you know, if I was writing a chapter recently on diversity in business schools, and I was impressed by the fact that if you go to Israel, you know, you can have Jews being a race, Arabs being a race, or is it a religion, or we don't quite know. There are these fluid and flexible terms. And one of the challenges I faced was, how do we deal with these terms? Because as a business person, you have to. But most of the terms don't make sense. East and West does not make sense. It doesn't make sense in the East either. You know, we had this thing called what? The Middle East? I'm guessing that once upon a time that was the East. And then someone thought, oh my goodness, there's more to come?
That's the British.
Yeah.
Between India and Egypt, Middle
East. So
East.
then we got this thing, and we got, you know, my mother's from the West Indies, right? So we've got this thing. None of it makes sense, but we're stuck with these terms. I can't say don't use the word black, right? But what does black mean now? If you're going to get a music award, then yeah, everybody's black, right? You know, if it's about cracking a joke, everybody's black. And the thing that I learned, though, was, you know, my father is white and Scottish, and my mother is black and Caribbean. I didn't know that I had a black mother and a white father until I went to school. My classmates and my teachers told me so. Prior to that, they were just mum and dad. So the thing is, right, and this is true, the thing that I thought then is, with all of these terms, if the terms aren't helping us to understand things better, why are we sticking with these terms? Or we have to stick with the terms. How can we reinterpret them? Which is why I went back to some of these other things. So this idea of democracy, and we've alluded to this fact, what does democracy mean? What does Islam mean? Does it even matter what it means? Is it more that we should be trying to look at things from other people's perspectives? So to kind of round up, I would say, yeah, Islam and democracy, of course they're compatible if you define what Islam is or democracy, or maybe we shouldn't even define what those terms are. But I think there are two take-home words that I want you to think about: osmosis and surrogacy. Osmosis, because, you know, for some of you that have studied science, it's the idea of transferring particles from high concentration to low concentration. It's not just about two-way communication. And this extends to innovation or scaling up or whatever. It's taking stuff from here to there and creating an equilibrium and having porous boundaries where that can happen. You need rules. I'm not going to advocate not having rules or saying, let's not look at the Sharia, or let's do away with religion, or let's do away with national identity or anything like that. They need to remain. Surrogacy, because it's not just about understanding, it's about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. It's about being adopted or looking to be adopted. So most of my time in trying to go to, you know, Ethiopia or Iran or Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan or all of these places has been to put on the turban, to sit on the floor, to go in the desert, but actually to do those things because they're really important. Is to try and see things from other people's perspectives. And that, I think, ties in yesterday with something that resonated with me, which was this idea of education and this idea of plasticity of the mind. The only way that you can cope with things like trying to understand these geographies and youth culture and, you know, all of these other emerging phenomena is plasticity of mind. But also, I'm going to link elasticity of time. Time is relative. If I gave you top tips today, they're not top tips tomorrow. A lot of this stuff is perishable. So really, I suppose part of me being here today is to wave a flag to say it's about us forming a network where we can call upon each other. You know, Jackie's in Jakarta. You know, and so I knew, I had this gut that Gangnam Style was going to be big in Jakarta because I looked at the maths, I thought they're into K-pop, they're into cosmetics from Korea, they're learning Korean, and lo and behold, I go to Jakarta a couple of years ago, and there's a whole army of people, you know, waking me up at 6 in the morning doing Gangnam Style, in the car park, headscarves, no headscarves, whatever. I was right. So I think the thing is that it's about trying to form these links together and not being so pre-concerned with the dogma that, and we should leave that to the religious leaders and the politicians. As business people, we can see that things go across countries. I mean, if you were to go to Kazakhstan now, they'd say, of course, Apple is an important brand because Almaty, yeah, grandfather of the apple. All apples come from Kazakhstan, apparently. It was Alexander the Great that took them to Macedonia. But it's this idea that I want us to think about, which is, do we have to be caught up with the dogma of terms? Do we have to prescribe things? Or is culture something that we can organically or intuitively act in a certain way, just as we have over the past couple of days, that you just go up and talk to somebody? And actually making mistakes is okay because that's part of human existence, right? But you know, if we are too cautious, you miss out. And I think that's something that I kind of learned upon my few years of journey, and I've taken up too much time, and it's drinks.
That's right, Jonathan, mate. You're holding us up.
Muhammed, I'm sorry.
So, Muhammed, Jonathan, that was deeply insightful. Thank you. Some great points there. Innovation entrepreneurism. Muhammed, so obviously the Quran teaches us some commercial guidelines, I guess. So how does innovation entrepreneurism playing itself out in the Middle East, particularly where you're involved?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if do we have some slides?
You do, yeah.
Okay. So let me just start by saying, so the lens that I've been looking at things is through the entrepreneurship and specifically technology entrepreneurship in the Middle East. I spent a couple of years out in Silicon Valley at a different business school, which we won't name, and after that decided to hop out to the Middle East. I'm actually Iraqi American. and had always wanted to plant some roots in the Middle East to really experience and do something to help build over there. And decided that the space that was most interesting is in the entrepreneurial world, and founded an e-commerce company, went through an experience of scaling up a business there and all the challenges that are associated with it. And from that experience, founded AstroLabs with a partner of mine. And our mission really is to really reduce the barriers to scaling up companies, technology startups in the region. And so over the last year or so, we've taken our designed program, which is an acceleration program throughout the region. So we've taken a program that we call Scaling Online Startups through from Dubai, where we have our base and have run it a few times there, to Egypt and Jordan and Lebanon and multiple places in Saudi Arabia, bringing together founders of online businesses all in one venue and helping deal with their most pressing kind of challenges and such. So I just put in a few pictures just so you can get a sense of what it's like. So when you're thinking, what's entrepreneurship look like in these different places, you have some photos to be associated with, right? So here, I mean, Dubai and the UAE is very multicultural, right? So 20% are local, and the rest are from everywhere. So that's one of the beauties of when you think of Islamic world. Here, this is part of it, but you have an environment that really is way more cosmopolitan than New York, right? This is, you can have one team that has somebody from Iran and Russia and the US, and you can do whatever, right? And so, you know, the dynamic changes quite a bit when you go to the Levant, right, which is a lot more Arab. But you can see, you know, what it looks like. I'd also point out through these pictures, you'll see, to Rahilla's point, the concentration of women. Note that these are all women founders of online businesses. Try to find pictures like this in Silicon Valley, right? Yep, exactly, non-existent, right? You know, we've done multiple programs in Saudi Arabia. Here, you know, and the bottom one is from Khobar, which is in the eastern province. The top picture is from Riyadh. We've done one in Jeddah. We always have women participants who are running their own businesses, right? And it's one of the points around that is that it is a great equalizer. It's a lot of women are going into technology. They're getting educated in the space and also are starting up companies, right? So I just threw in a few pictures just so you have a sense of what I'm talking about. A few just other points about what's happening in the region, which is kind of interesting in terms of where is innovation, entrepreneurship, and everything going. Some statistics or some points to think about, right? Really the big markets or the big areas are the Gulf and within the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, right? Levant, which is a smaller market, but where a lot of the engine is happening in terms of talent, and then North Africa. Each one is quite a bit different. I'll say a few words about Saudi Arabia in particular. Saudi Arabia is the #1 consumer of YouTube videos per capita globally. All right? They're one of the highest in terms of social engagement. Twitter is off the charts, right? When we do our programming there, it's Twitter crazed, it's sharing everything. It's almost like a reaction to having a kind of a more restrictive environment that they're operating within, that sharing is off the charts. Consumption of content online is off the charts, but also creation of content is off the charts. So one of our good friends, a gentleman named Abdullah Mando, runs a company called U-Turn, which has now about 30 million views on YouTube for their content every month, doing comedy shows, doing all sorts of produced stuff in Saudi Arabia. Right?
Women comedy shows too. Yeah.
Yes.
Saudi women have their own comedy shows on YouTube.
Fantastic. Exactly. So there's a lot of this type of energy happening throughout the region. I mean, we deal with entrepreneurs that are doing everything from building up a global, May Habib in the UAE is building up a global distributed translation company called Qortuba, which has taken multiple rounds, Series A and B financing, and is growing around the world. There's a lot of interesting things that are happening, and I think Dubai is emerging more and more of that hub and focal point, because a lot of talent is actually flowing in from some of the more, I would say, the conflict areas, some of the more challenging parts of the region are coming to a safe haven to start their own concepts. So those are a few thoughts, I would say, just about entrepreneurship in the region.
Mohammed, thank you.
Yep.
So a little change of pace. I've got some wrap-up comments here, but I'll be absolutely surprised that somebody in this audience doesn't have a compelling question to ask this panel. So I have some, but I'd like to open it. Anybody out there want to ask? Be provocative. I know I'm standing between you and beer, but go. Thank you.
Do I need a mic?
No, just tell me and I'll repeat it back.
I just wanted to notice the conflation between Arab and Muslim. Right?
Okay, so question is, understand the conflation between Muslim and Arab.
So most of the women in the Islamic world are not in the Arab world.
Okay.
Right? And most of the Muslims in the Muslim world are not in the Arab world.
Okay, so most Muslims don't exist in the Arab world. So who wants to tackle that?
I want to hear
Sorry.
the sort of, you spoke about, Kazakhstan and sort of other spots, but where's the voice of Muslims that live in Indonesia or India, et cetera,
Okay.
that are in countries where they're sometimes not even the majority, but there's very large numbers of them, and
Sure.
I feel like they're just absent in conversations
Okay.
about the Arab world.
So the question is, and then I'll hand over, so just so everybody knows, is really where's the voice for the Muslim populations in countries like India, Indonesia, and other countries where sometimes they are the minority, but a very large one, like in particular India. So where's that voice? So
I would say on social media, and it's quite generational, because you mentioned India, there's what, 160 million Muslims. Pakistan will overtake Indonesia, I think, in 30 years' time, if you believe Pew. There are some really large figures, and you're right that, whilst Islam revolves around Arabic as a language, the majority of people cannot speak Arabic and are not Arabs. And even if we go back to the geography and you look throughout the history, the boundaries have shifted. I noticed in your slide, Rahilla, it had kind of, I think, was it the Arab world or something? But it had Iran in there. If there were Iranians in the audience, they'd be tutting, because they're Persians, right? And even...
Well, in my book, there were no Persians. They're all Arab women. That was just the map.
Yeah, but I think the map was highlighted as with Iran, and obviously
But
the parts of
it's
Iraq
different,
that used to be part of Persia, and Afghanistan and Uzbekistan and all of these areas. It was quite a challenge for me going back through the old maps and thinking, okay, how do all of these things jigsaw together? But I think that there's a big generational gap amongst the younger population. There is a big connection. So one of the things is, you could say, computer literacy. Southeast Asia is a hot spot for that. I think in the top 10 tweeting cities in the world, Indonesia has 2. I think Jakarta and I don't know if it's, yeah. So, and Saudi Arabia is in the top 10 as well. Then you've got London and you've got, New York, I think. So you're seeing amongst this younger population, they are connecting. And I write for a fashion magazine coming out of Singapore. And, largely you've got a massive population of female entrepreneurs. Fashion is cool. It's cool to wear a headscarf and look good and all of these things. If you don't believe me, go on YouTube and type in Mipsters from the United States. There were women on headscarves, on skateboards and things like that. But I think that, you're seeing that this kind of supposed minority, that actually are a majority, are being more vocal. And then France is connecting, Bosnia is connecting, the UK is connecting. But I think the other thing that I'd like to add to that is the role of English. And one of the things that I've written about is never before has English been so important in Islam. Because I've been to conferences over the past year. You go to Dubai, I went to an Islamic Economy Summit. There was the World Islamic Economic Forum in London, with, seeing David Cameron there, unbuttoning his jacket and talking about Sharia compliant student loans in the UK and Islamic bonds. You're seeing something where everybody was talking in English. From Jordan, from most of the world leaders, including Afghanistan, from Malaysia, they were all talking in English. And I think one of the things in response to the title, which says leading in it, I would say, are we going to have leaders in the Muslim world anymore? Or are the younger generation going to present a leaderless opposition? If we think about the Arab Spring, is it really about leadership? And I know a lot of the Muslim world is preoccupied with this idea of creating the leaders of tomorrow. But what if people arrive at consensus through leaderless opposition, through anonymity, through social media? And that's really what young people are doing. And I think Indonesia is especially strong for that. Malaysia's doing it. And if I look in my neighborhoods in London, for example, my nearest mosque is about 100 yards away. It used to be a pub or bar. I'm in America, right? But no one was going. The Muslims bought it, they got permission, it became a mosque. Another pub down the road is now a shisha bar. They gave it the alcohol license, and you know what Muslims are like, right? It's okay to smoke, but it's not okay to drink. So I think that, yeah, we're seeing it's a generational change, but that is linked to computers.
So Muhammed, Rahilla, do you any point of view here that you'd like to add? No? Okay.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Just very quickly, in my opinion, I think the center of the Muslim world, I just think images of you're seeing Saudi women, for instance, just take on religious interpretations from polygamy, if women have to cover their face or not, or their hair. I mean, they're just taking everything on. And I think that a person in Pakistan or Indonesia, in my opinion, when they're seeing that come from Saudi, I think is very influential. So, I mean, I'm biased towards the influence of the Middle East, even though it's not the majority population, and that's just my opinion.
So we'll take other questions at the bar. So a quick wrap up. Sorry, no time. I'm sorry, because people have got to dismantle the equipment. No, sorry, in the bar. We'll do it in the, no, sorry. Really? I'll be killed if this equipment does not get to the theatre tonight, trust me. My life's not worth it. So just I think some key points. Trust me, when Rob's in a bad mood, you don't want to be there. So, especially over etudes, or actually Jeffrey is the one to be more scared of. So I think on the woman's side, actually one thing I have to say is, after listening to even this brief thing, is, in the US we pride ourselves on we're the most progressive country in the world for women. Well, maybe we should go look somewhere else for some inspiration. I think there's some stereotypes, and you see the photos of women entrepreneurs and women doing great things, fantastic, powerful women taking on things. Maybe there's some insights and lessons for us to go to other countries that we stereotype and say, everybody's oppressed, gee, look how free we are. So that's just a thought. GE continues to surprise me as a corporation. Who would think GE's bringing over 30 women from Saudi Arabia, and they come here with initiatives and we'll help fund and enable you. I mean, they continue to surprise as a major global corporation. So I think you helped dispel. There's some powerful women taking on some powerful interests and are not accepting status quo that's happening in their country. Jonathan, great. Didn't know your mum was black and dad was white till you went to school?
Neither did I.
That's cool. That's that's interesting. There's some deep insights in there. I think the most important point I took away from you is, dogma, and really is reframing the way we ask questions. So maybe democracy, jihad, all these terms that are peppered, maybe we just need to trash all that and reframe the way we think about the world and look at it and come to decisions, because potentially it's the way we ask questions that are preventing us to see the possibilities. So I think that's, and definitely democracy and democratic institutions can coexist in any religious environment. Okay. Entrepreneurship, Muhammed, I think you showed us, it's alive, it's well. Those pictures actually could be anywhere in the world, right? Who looked at those pictures and said, I can tell that's in the Gulf countries? I mean, that could be Europe, UK, Australia, America, and potentially the number of women may have been greater in those photos than many of those countries I just mentioned. So I know, like in Australia and New Zealand, you would not see that percentage of women, or in the US, in startup areas as CEOs and founders. It would be challenging. So, and again, Saudi sharing creation, per capita consumption of YouTube. Then you get the dichotomy of Turkey trying to ban YouTube, right? Then their courts say, no, you can't. So there's obviously a lot of things going on. But, I think it's an exciting world out there, without question. There's lots of changes, a lot of positive change. One thing I'd urge you to do is look beyond the superficial. I think, if we talk about change, I think with this group in here, I think there's a lot of stereotypes being bounded around about Muslim and the Islamic world, not just the Arab world, but all those countries, is we as individuals to help drive changes. when people are talking about it, when you're in conversations, ask people to look beyond the superficial. And there's a lot, and we can be messengers of change and help reframing thinking. Because I think those are some of the things that we need to do to create the change out there. So please join me in thanking this great panel. Thanks, guys. Thank you.